Hey everybody, it's Mike. Welcome to Chip Damage. And tonight we're going to be talking about the Game Awards. Yes, it's on the tip of the tongues of every gamer out there. Everyone who's kind of into gaming news is probably having some of the announcements and the awards that were just listed off running through their heads. So I thought it'd be a good time to talk about my thoughts on it, my takeaways from it, what excited me, what bored me, and of course to get your feedback on it. I'll say it again at the end of the video, but I always love hearing what my audience has to think about things like this. The comments in these videos are the reasons I continue to make these videos, as I've said many times before. But yeah, the Game Awards, let's talk about it. So to begin, the Game Awards is a weird thing. I feel that many people, whether they be in the media or YouTubers or just regular people who game, fall into one of two categories. Either A, they put too much stock into the awards and like they actually think that it's like very important and that if your game doesn't win, it's like a disgrace. Like the game that you want to win is it's a dishonor. Or there's like category B, which I feel that I fall more into, where it's like I just kind of watch for the upcoming game announcements. I don't really care who wins what, but if a game that I really like gets some recognition, that's really nice. And yeah, it's an odd ceremony, isn't it? Just to talk about it very quickly. I see what the creator of the show, Jeff Keighley, is trying to do, and I strongly respect it. He's trying to give recognition to game makers and make gaming, which is still, though more mainstream than it was in years prior, still somewhat of a niche market form of media, because you have to remember, regardless of how many people are into gaming these days, it is still the only form of media with a learning curve. Like you don't need to really learn how to watch movies or listen to music, and all you need to do to read is read books is to learn how to read, or read comics is have a basic understanding of a language. Gaming still has the learning curve of understanding how games controls work, understanding how to hold a mouse and keyboard or controller, the rules of the game, and it's a challenge. So gaming is still, like I said, even though it's more popular than ever, still like walled off from the mainstream society. But however, the creators put a ton of work into games, and I like that Jeff Keighley is trying to highlight these very artistic or very talented people in all fields, whether it be, game design, the actual technical part of it, the artistic design, the writing, the music. There's a lot of work that goes into these games, and for years and years, a lot of them don't get recognition. So I really love what he's trying to do. However, gaming is also different than movies or in music in the terms of like the awards are very hard to quantify like quality, because most movies fall into similar formats. Like let's talk about the Academy Awards as a comparison. Like most movies are between an hour and a half and 3 hours, and they tell a story. Most of them have 3 acts, and like you just go in and go out. Same with music. Like whether it be in different genres, rock, pop, or hip hop, it's still mostly like, a 3 to 7 minute song that you kind of listen to and you judge against its peers on that basis. Like a game could be 2 hours long or 200 hours long. It can be single player only, it can be multiplayer only, and they can still end up in the same category of like game of the year or best score, best soundtrack. Like how do you do that? Like how do you compare and contrast these? It makes it a very odd process of selecting nominees and choosing what's the best. I mean, how do you compare a first-person shooter to a fighting game? You really can't, but both can really go up against each other in certain categories, and that's really a unique thing to gaming. So it's an odd thing, but I do like what the recognition it brings to the people involved in games. And hell, it's a great show to kind of gather all eyes, like an E3, 6 months away from E3, which is typically in June, like in winter and December, to kind of like get some announcements, because most of the time we wait all year for E3, and there's less big game shows than there used to be. Like Sony used to have big press conferences. That's not really a thing anymore. And it's nice to have another tentpole event in the year to just kind of get you through and give you some updates on some of the bigger products and projects going in the works. And you get rather a large number of them. So that's always cool, and that's fun to watch. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on like the idea of the Game Awards. I don't put too much stock into what's what, because let's be honest, this is for like pseudo normie gamers. It's odd. You don't get the Call of Duty and Madden audience watching the Game Awards. You get like more core gamers, But like, as far as like game collectors or retro gamers or, like it's not really for that audience. It's like somewhere in the middle. I don't know, like between hardcore and casual gamers. I feel like that's really what the Game Awards is for. I mean, no, and we'll get into why. It's a weird thing, but I'm glad it happens. But this year was very cool. This year had some very cool announcements, some interesting award winners, and I think it's a very interesting topic to go into for the rest of this video. So please join me as we jump into this. And if you like what you're about to hear, of course, like and subscribe after that long preamble. So let's start with, and very quickly we'll be going through the awards themselves. Now I'm not going to list every single award or nominee. I'm just going to list some bullet points of some interesting things because quite honestly, I didn't care a lot about them. If you care about best, content creator or anything to do with esports whatsoever, please turn the video off now. I'm not talking about that for 1 second because I honestly can't care less. And with the speed that they dole out those awards, I feel like Jeff Keighley doesn't care either. And I think that's good on him because silly awards. But let's start right with the big two, right? The big two winners of the night were, of course, Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok. Now, going into these award shows, they were nominated for everything. They're very different types of games, but they do share some similarities that I really enjoy. And they were kind of the contenders in most categories for, like what was probably going to win most things, because these are voted on by consensus of gaming journalists from big sites like IGN, Destructoid, Easy Allies, GameSpot, so on and so forth. So, and you can just kind of, these journalists always give the highest reviews and praise to a certain type of game. And these two definitely were the leads going in to try to win everything. And they won a lot of it. And, I love both these games. Like Elden Ring, which I got into earlier this year, I don't want to give it away. I don't know what my game of the year is yet, but between Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok, I definitely preferred Elden Ring. I love God of War. I really, really do. But however, I just like the off the rails nature of Elden Ring. Like that game, if you mess up, it's on you. The scope of the game, everything about it. But really, I couldn't be upset if either one of these games ended up winning Game of the Year. But I am happy to announce right off the top that Game of the Year did in fact go to Elden Ring, which is surprising and not surprising at the same time, because 2019, Sekiro, this game's in many ways predecessor, also won Game of the Year, and that was an incredibly difficult video game that is, like I said, has a very high learning curve and kind of scares away casual audiences. But surprisingly, it won. And I'm glad to see Elden Ring did as well, because Elden Ring, just with the sheer amount of content, both God of War and Elden Ring share some features that I love still exist in video games and still get praised. They're single player, mostly exclusive, like single player exclusively in God of War's case, but mostly single player focused in Elden Ring. You could play with other people, but you can play it entirely by yourself, and it's really more, in a lot of ways, made as a single player game. You have a lot of restrictions with inviting people and things like that. They don't have they worked mostly on day one. Like I know Elden Ring had some patches, but like they came out and they were good. They were content complete. There was updates, of course. Elden Ring will probably have a DLC in the future. However, these games were not made in a way that they pulled content away from the initial release. Like Elden Ring's hundreds of hours long. So is God of War is very, very long game. Like they're not designed to steal your money. There's no microtransactions. And I love that. I love that these are just like good games the day you buy them. That's, becoming a rare thing these days. And, God of War, I love my story-driven games, but God of War is slowly, especially with Ragnarok, kind of becoming a little bit too cinematic for my taste. I still think it's an excellent, excellent game, but, I believe the developers use the term a frictionless experience when developing the game. Like, the game kind of tells you a lot of the puzzles. The combat's never too hard to overcome. You always kind of know exactly where to go and what to do, and it's becoming more story-focused. I love story in games, but when it comes to comparing a game against like Elden Ring, which gives you very little context to the story, it's a very dreamlike setting, and it's all gameplay, innovation, figuring things out, discovering them, hard combat, getting punished for foolish mistakes and learning from them. I gotta give it to Elden Ring. That's more my type of game. I think that's a more classic type of game. And I used to would say that game would scare people away, but it's a huge seller. It's one of the biggest sellers of the year and continues to sell fantastically. So good on you, Elden Ring. And that's probably the longest spiel I'll go on about the awards themselves. But it was basically between those two for all the biggest awards. You got Best Direction, Best Director, really, going to Hidetaka Miyazaki, the director of the game. He deserves it. Absolutely. I think gaming needs auteurs like that, people who take the helm. This is more common in Japan with people like Hideo Kojima and like obviously Miyazaki himself, as well as a number of other creators like Hideki Kamiya from Platinum Games. I like when strong personalities take control of a game and kind of deliver an uncompromising vision, whether it be like Shinji Mikami from Capcom. There's a number of other creators I can't think off the top of my head, and mostly all from Japan. Japan still allows directors to have a large impact on the games they make. Well, I feel like Western games have more of a committee feel. Like you don't really, like, of course, many people know Cory Barlog is the director of the God of War, the newer God of War games and the old God of War 2, but like many big Western games, you don't know the director. Like, who directed Horizon Forbidden West? Like, I'm sure they're very talented, but I don't know who they are. However, like, you know the directors of series like Metal Gear and Castlevania, like Yoshi P from Final Fantasy 14. Like, these are very important characters that control the vision. And I think that's something important that we're lacking in the West. So good on you, Hidetaka Miyazaki, with Best Director. Best art direction went to Elden Ring. Can't complain with that. Game's gorgeous. Best voice actor or VO, like performance, went to the main voice actor from God of War. Fantastic. Good job with Kratos. Best music went to God of War. I love Barry McCreary, the composer of those games. He also did the music on the Godzilla King of the Monsters movie, which I love. I think that's fantastic. Best audio design, I guess, like sound effects, God of War. Best accessibility, for whatever that is, God of War. Best story or narrative, God of War. And best action adventure, God of War. So like God of War won the most, but Elden Ring won the best awards, like the biggest awards. So yeah, they swept up. However, I'm very happy to see that in the pure action category, this game right to my left, Bayonetta 3, won Best Action Game. It strongly deserves that, in my opinion. Bayonetta has always been at top of its class in action games, third-person action games, character action games, whatever you want to say, along with Devil May Cry and Ninja Gaiden. But, this year, it kind of goes uncontested. Bayonetta 3 was fantastic. I have a lot of thoughts on whether I think it's the best in the trilogy, but I'll make another video about that. But I love that it finally got some recognition. And something I'll mention during this, like, even though I don't care who wins, I do like it when a good game gets recognition, because maybe developers and people who pay for games are like, you know what? Or like producers be like, you know what? Let's pour more money. Like, let's focus on making a game like this or continuing this series. Maybe Bayonetta 3 winning this award tells Nintendo, make a Bayonetta 4. That's always great to hear. It's not the biggest franchise in the world, and it can always use that boost. And you have some weird stuff, man. This one I want to talk about for a second is the best fighting game. There was controversy with this, that Sifu, which is a third-person action game, like a hand-to-hand action game, like a beat-em-up. Basically a beat-em-up was nominated for best fighting game. I think that's not due to a lack of understanding of what a fighting game is, but maybe a lack of nominees this year. But I would have just left it at 4. The other nominees were Multiverses, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R, King of Fighters 15, and DNF Duel. Now, I'll tell you right now, the winner went to Multiverses. That's wrong. That is the one where I'm like, yeah, I knew this was a dumb category because Sifu was in it. It's like a good game, but it's not a fighting game. But like Multiverses, I played for like 2 hours because it was free, and I'm like, this is boring. Like, it makes you realize like something like Smash Brothers is so special, because not only do the creators like Masahiro Sakurai, the director of the game, another auteur, like, you see how well he massages characters into a game. Like, they all fit. Like, Sephiroth can fight Donkey Kong and it doesn't feel weird. It feels like right. Like, there's little nuances and idiosyncrasies of both the characters in those models, like in the actual fighting game, the fighting of the game. The stages are put in, the music, like, those are very important. Multiverses, it just feels like a hodgepodge, like a shotgun of characters that WB just happens to own. And like, it shows you how important stages and music are, because it was just so bland. Like, there's nothing wrong with the fighting engine. It felt pretty similar to Smash. It was more like 2-player, like team-based, but it was just so boring to me. And I know it had like huge numbers in the launch, but I know it just dropped off dramatically. Like, no one talks about it anymore. I know they still update it, but like, that was odd. And given that the other games on this list are a bit more esoteric, a bit more kind of like niche, like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R. I platinumed that game. I have the original on PS3. I rebought it. I love it. It's fantastic. I think that, you know, the fighting in that game is really good. But if you're not a JoJo fan, I don't know if that's enough to really make that like fighting game of the year. I think it has great mechanics and a huge roster and unbelievable style. But I don't know, man. Maybe these judges just weren't JoJo's fan. I'm glad it got some recognition, though, just by being nominated. That's good. That first release of it really went under the radar. DNF Duel is a game that is beautiful, but it's like, you know, why would you play this Arc System, like this beautiful 2D Arc System work fighting game when like you can just play Dragon Ball FighterZ or Guilty Gear Strive instead, and they have more personality? Like, I have some issues with this game. It plays okay. It's a little simple, but like I think characters are incredibly important in fighting games. Like, fighting games are just their characters. And even though these games aren't story or lore based, like you want to kind of connect with that character that you pick, whether it be on a technical point, but also on a stylistic point and maybe a personality point. Like, you know, I like, you know, Cody in Street Fighter because he's like, you know, a laid back hero who's like a former criminal, or, you know, I like Scorpion because of the revenge tale or whatever. Like DNF Duel, it's like, do you really want to play as Grappler or Gunner or, you know, Berserker? Like, I hate that about that game. And you feel like those characters are made for mobile phones, which is what the game is originally based on. So I can see why that didn't win. However, like King of Fighters 15, which came out earlier this year, despite not being the best looking game ever, is fantastic. That game plays really well. It has a huge roster at start. The DLC has been rolling out at a steady pace with a pretty solid lineup of characters. I would have given it to that, but yet again, that's more of a fighting game, fans fighting game. While Multiverses was just like this big, like, you know, explosion on social media. So I see why they get it, but it makes me sad. And the only other award I want to talk about that I'm like, all right, I kind of want this to get a little recognition, but it was, you know, a strangely competitive year. It was best adaptation, you know, like best turning a game into a movie or show. It was between Cyberpunk Edge Runners, Arcane, Cuphead, Sonic the Hedgehog the movie, and Uncharted the movie. Uncharted the movie wasn't going to win. It's boring. Sonic 2, okay movie, but like against the others, I didn't think it was going to win. The Cuphead show is all right. I don't think it quite captures the zaniness of the game, but it was a solid attempt. It really was between like Cyberpunk, Edge Runners, and Arcane. And I don't like League of Legends in the least, but like the show is pretty good. It was heavily praised. However, Cyberpunk Edge Runners was is the best anime I've seen this year, from a beloved studio, Trigger. Like, they knocked it out of the park with Cyberpunk Edge Runners. I had no interest in ever playing Cyberpunk. After watching that show, it really moved me, and it made me want to dive into that world a little bit in a way that very few adaptations could. I bought Cyberpunk afterwards, and though I don't think the game is as good as that anime, I will say it, that may make you mad, I'm sorry, like that game is good, but that anime was fantastic for what it did in 10 episodes. It was so stylish. I really wish that won, but of course it went to Arcane. What are you going to do? That's all I have to say about that. That's really all I have to say about the awards in general. I want to know, what are your thoughts on what won? Or do you think anyone got shafted? Do you care? Do you not care? Are you glad something that you like got some recognition? That's all I really want to know. I want to know what you guys think. And yeah, let's move on to what I really watched the show for. I could care less. Multiverses could have won every game on this list, won every award on this list. I cared about what they were going to announce, and they started with a doozy. Oh, I'm excited for this. They announced the release date along with a slew of new characters for Street Fighter 6. I may have mentioned in a prior video that I was able to play the Street Fighter 6 beta earlier this year, and it was phenomenal. I cannot tell you enough about how much I love the little nuances to that game, the style, the character designs, everything about it. I think it's a brilliant mix. I mean, Street Fighter V ended up being a pretty damn good game at the end of its life cycle, but it took 2 or 3 years to really get out of the doldrums, and it never really shook the stink of its launch year off. Street Fighter 6 is coming out of the gate hard. They announced 4 new characters, the classic DJ, then a couple new characters. You have Marissa, the large Italian like lady grappler. You have JP, who's like a very mysterious psycho-wielding user, and then you have Manon, like the French. It looks like MMA, like graceful MMA fighter, and they all look pretty damn cool. DJ looks better than ever. Love his new look. They showed a slew of the single player like creative character mode, which looks pretty interesting. They showed a bunch of new mini games like cutting bottles. Like, And after what I've seen in the beta, which already had a ton of mini games, a bunch of classic playable Capcom games, and 8 characters that already played great, this game is going to kill it. This game is going to be a revolution for fighting games, I think, in a way, or a reinvigoration, much the same way that Street Fighter 4 was back in 2009. And I just love it. I cannot wait for that one. What are your thoughts on that? Have you played the beta? Are you excited for any of the new characters? What are your thoughts on Street Fighter 6? Because they started strong. And, they are followed closely by their 3D counterpart. Another fantastic fighting game sequel, Tekken 8, was shown off. And this was more of a cinematic trailer, but they did show some new characters in it. The game looks incredible. I believe it's a next-gen exclusive, so it's not really being held back by the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One visually, which is great. Because Tekken 7 looked fantastic. It still looks pretty damn good, but at the time it came out, it was really something else, and I hope they keep that momentum. That game was so good. And they showed a couple new returning characters. You got your Paul, you got Law, you got King, of course, classics that have never really left Tekken. I'm glad to see them, along with some fantastic fights between Jin and Kazuya. But the returning character may be in the works. Jun Kazama, which Jin's mother and Kazuya's lover. We haven't seen her in years and years and years, not counting non-canon titles like Tekken Tag Tournament. Coming into Tekken 8, and hopefully she's in it. But the game looks fantastic. I have full confidence that that game is going to be good because Tekken 7 just got better and better as time went on. So, fighting games are, and it's supposed to come out in 2023. So next year, Street Fighter and Tekken, I don't see them as competitors. If you want to play 2D fighting game, you're going to get Street Fighter. If you want to play a 3D fighting game, you're going to get Tekken. Or you're going to be a guy like me who loves both and is going to get both. What do you guys think about Tekken 8? And then we got something that we didn't know about. Rumored, perhaps leaked by one of the actors mistakenly, but you never know with this guy. We saw the beginning of a nice trailer, and then like a very graphically impressive game, a very graphically impressive game of a mother playing with her baby. And then we saw the thing that I love to see more than anything else in video games, a cut that says a Hideo Kojima game. And I knew what this was right away. I think most people knew what this was right away. It's not Metal Gear, guys. But we saw a trailer for Death Stranding 2, or DS2 as it's being stylized. Fantastic. Death Stranding 1 was somewhat of a divisive game when it came out in 2019. However, I loved it. It was one of my favorite games that year. May have been my game of the year that year. I think Kojima speaks a language that only a certain type of person gets, a certain type of gamer understands. And when it hits hard. And I was worried about it because it got middling reviews from a lot of larger publications, but I feel like smaller publications loved it. And I think that after the pandemic, that game really hit hard for a lot of people. I mean, Kojima even made a joke about predicting the future with it. And however, the game ended up selling pretty well between PlayStation and PC, even getting an upgrade and a director's cut. However, a sequel for a game like that with a large celebrity cast and a high budget, it's never, certain. And it didn't really exactly feel like a game that necessarily needed a sequel, but I'm glad that we're getting one. I'm so happy to be hopping back in there with Norman Reedus, Sam Porter Bridges, and the rest of the cast to see what weird story we have. Because there's one thing you have to say about Death Stranding. It was creative. It was incredibly hard to call what was happening or what was going to happen. You couldn't predict Death Stranding, and that's very rare in gaming today, where you see it all. After you play enough JRPGs and kill enough gods and devils and demons and aliens and fairies and monsters, and you play as those types of characters, it's very hard to surprise jaded gamers like myself. And make a good game out of it. And that's what I think Death Stranding did. And I hope that weight really spills over into Death Stranding 2. However, we have no release date. I think Death Stranding was announced a good 3 years before its a release in 2019. I think it was announced in 2016, released in 2019. And it might be that long for Death Stranding 2, who knows? But I'm always in store for whatever Hideo Kojima has for me. Like I said, an auteur that, is rare and is much needed. So yeah, Death Stranding 2, a highlight for me. And jumping around here a little bit, we going to another auteur, Hidetaka Miyazaki of Elden Ring fame, From Software, brought a big gun, a very much requested return to form with Armored Core 6, The Fires of Rubicon. Now this got people hyped. Not only was the trailer fantastic, there's no gameplay, but it set a tone. It set a tone for what the type of game it will be. If you're not aware, Armored Core is an old school franchise debuting back on the original PlayStation. It is a very succinct, complicated mech building and combat game. Like you build a mech to the most minute details. Its weight, its speed, its weaponry, its ammo loadout, and then you go out and battle, and they're wonderful. Armored Core 4 and its spin-off 4 Answer on the Xbox 360 and PS3 were particular favorites of mine. I love those games. Little did I know that they were actually directed by Hidetaka Miyazaki before he did Demon Souls and Dark Souls. I was unaware of that, playing that. I just loved this mech game back in 2008 when I was 19 years old. Like, I got so into those games. And then, unfortunately, Armored Core 5 did not live up. It had different directors. It just wasn't very good in a lot of ways. I heard that it was later updated to be better, but the initial launch of that game was just so middling. I didn't really pursue it, and I didn't hear a lot of people talking highly about it. And then it kind of disappeared for, I believe, nearly a decade at this point. And I'm really glad to see that next year we're finally getting another Armored Core. From Software is an amazing company. They haven't missed with their Soul series in the last decade, more than a decade now since Demon Souls. However, the smaller titles that they used to make are kind of getting really thin and few and far between. You know, there was like 3D Dot Game Heroes comes to mind, was like the last one. That was on the PS3. But like games like, you know, like Armored Core or Togi or Tenchu have kind of disappeared by the wayside. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're clearly putting their focuses in the right places with the Soul series and games like Elden Ring, but it's nice to see them going back to an OG like Armored Core, and hopefully Miyazaki will be in the director's chair or be overlooking this game. Because I would love to hop back in there and make my white glint clone and play some Armored Core like I did back on the 360 and years prior. So yeah, nice surprise, nice throwback with Armored Core Fires of Rubicon. Probably the coolest trailer visually all night. And jumping around again, we are going to a surprise announcement. So yes, Bayonetta 3 winning Action Game of the Year, only coming out within a month right around Halloween. Fantastic game. They announced I want to say a spin-off, but it could also be like a DLC expansion. But I believe it was kind of billed as its own separate entity, maybe downloadable smaller game. Bayonetta 3 Origins, Cereza and the Last Demon. This is weird to me, guys. We didn't get a Bayonetta game for 8 years, and then we're getting 2 in 4 months of each other, or 4 or 5 months of each other, and that's pretty shocking. So what it looked like to me, what it was in Bayonetta 3, there's a secret level that is fairly hard to find if you don't look up what to do, where you play in this like pastel painterly like book world, like this fairy tale book, as a young Bayonetta using her original name Cereza as a child, and you just kind of wander around like this pretty picture book, but there's not really much to it. It's definitely taking place in her past. And I thought that would be a lead into DLC, and it looks like it might be, or whatever this kind of expansion pack is, or mini game, where it looks like it takes place entirely in that book, and will give some background on the characters in the game, like Jean and Bayonetta. However, it's not exactly the same type of game. It looks like a spin-off game where it's not the third-person action game. Now, the Bayonetta series is one of my favorites of all time. Bayonetta 2 is in my top 3 games like of all time. I think it's phenomenal. However, the lore of the game is not what I care about. Like the story, a lot of people are upset with the story of the game. So spoilers, no spoilers. I didn't really care, as long as the game has a certain flair, a style, like a visual style, kind of like this blissful, free energy, and of course, most importantly, amazing combat and weaponry. Like that's really what it is. The feel of the game in your hands and the creative weaponry and abilities that you have to slay your enemies. That's what I care. The story itself, it can do whatever it really wants, and I won't care too much as long as it doesn't mess with that flair and that gameplay. It's a style and substance that kind of leaves the story to the wayside. And for this to be somewhat of a more story-based thing, that's not it doesn't exactly look, from the little bit that we see, to be totally gameplay focused. I don't know how much I care, how excited I am. I'm going to get it because this is one of my favorite action franchises, period, ever. But I'm excited that there's more Bayonetta so quickly. It's not exactly what I wanted, but let's see what it is. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe I'll end up loving it. Maybe the Bayonetta 3 lore will hook me in this one. Who knows? But that's coming out, I believe, in March, they said. And that's pretty cool. It's Bayonetta 3 Origins, Cereza, and the Last Demon. I'll check it out. Anything Bayonetta, usually money. And that brings us to two smaller announcements in my book anyway. And like I said, guys, I'm not talking about everything here that I don't have context on or didn't care about. I'm not a Diablo person or a Hades person. Just in general, isometric games I don't care about. Like, I'm glad that those people are getting Hades 2 and Diablo 4 is coming out next year, but I really have no context for them because, they're not my type of game. I'm not huge into those franchises. But two smaller announcements was the new Star Wars game, the sequel to Fallen Order. It's cool. Fallen Order, I got halfway through and kind of put down. I want to go back to it one day, but I'm not in a Star Wars mood. You know what I'm saying? Like, I did not like the last trilogy of films. Like, the shows are okay, but I don't always finish them. I'm just, Star Wars with me is like cyclical. Every like 5 years, I get into like a big Star Wars mood, and I'm just not there right now. So it's cool. More single player Star Wars games. EA making a single player game that isn't like a money grab is always cool. And then there was the new Crash Bandicoot game, which looks like a multiplayer team-based like battle game. Like, very odd. It looks like a platforming battle game, but not in the way of Smash Brothers. Somewhere like in a mix between like battle mode and Mario Kart, but with platforming. Like, it looks kind of cool. I mean, I'm surprised that Activision is still going to allow them to make Crash games. I've heard that they folded the Crash department into the Call of Duty gulags. Like, they kind of like weren't impressed with the sales of Crash Bandicoot 4, which I heard is a wonderful game. So I'm glad Crash is still getting some love. Even though I won't probably ever pick this one up, it's cool like just to see more Crash Bandicoot, a classic mascot, getting some love, And that'll bring me to my last topic, my last kind of game announcement / update of the night, and that is going to be Final Fantasy 16. And man, I don't know what to say without offending my audience out there, but let's be clear, guys. I love Final Fantasy. I love Square Enix. I think that they make plenty of mistakes, but they also make some of the greatest and most impactful games of all time. And Final Fantasy, at least here in the West, and I think in most parts of the world, is their flagship franchise. I know it's Dragon Quest mostly in Japan, but I think on a world stage, Final Fantasy is their most important and beloved franchise. And I've been with the franchise for 25 years now, and they are coming out with, it's weird, every like other game that they do is like really, really good. Like earlier in the year, they put out like Nier Replicant, and that was fantastic. And the Final Fantasy, 7 remake is fantastic. But then they put out like Left Alive or the Platinum Games game, Babylon's Fall, like these terrible games, or Marvel's Avengers. So like they're really a company that hits and misses all over the place. But with Final Fantasy, usually there's something to like about it. Whether like the audience out there can be very hyperbolic and saying like our game is really good or really bad for Final Fantasy. They all have a certain level of quality where like they're well made, and whether you dig the story or the lore or not is really personal. But they're always high budgeted, well made games one way or the other, despite your listing of the games. However, with Final Fantasy in the recent years, I feel that in the gaming world, putting my feelers out there with my own group of friends, watching other YouTubers, just knowing the general communities, there's starting to become a rift where there is the single player fans of Final Fantasy, and then there are the Final Fantasy 14 players. Now this, of course, began more back in Final Fantasy 11, but I believe that Final Fantasy 14 has reached a level of popularity much higher than 11 ever has, where fans can like both. Like, you can have played all the games. You can play Final Fantasy 14 every day and have played every single numbered entry in the franchise and love them all to death. And, you can be that person who just has that amount of time and who loves it. However, there's a lot of people who are strictly single player or strictly MMO players. And I think that's a rather large group. And I feel like you're starting to get a split there of focus, where I know Square Enix has a different division to do Final Fantasy 14, but you'll hear very hyperbolic things like Final Fantasy 14 has the greatest story of all Final Fantasies, but you just have to play the first 80 hours of this game to do it. Or you'll hear people on the other side say it's not a Final Fantasy because it's not a single player game. Like, how can you do this with a created character when, and you just have other players running around the whole time, kind of breaking the vibe. I fell somewhere in the middle, between these people, where I'm a single player Final Fantasy fan. I've never fully indulged in Final Fantasy 11 and 14 myself. I've watched the cutscenes of all their stories. I have friends who play all these games. But Final Fantasy 14, having looked into the story itself, it is good, but it's a very differently designed game. It's a fantastic MMO. It's probably the best MMO out there right now. Um, and that brings me to Final Fantasy 16, which is being taken over by the creative team led by Yoshi P, who's not the director. I believe he's just the producer on Final Fantasy 16. And he is the head of that game. And what that brings me all to is the vibe of this game. And I think I'm not alone in this. I think there's plenty of people who are excited out there. But I want you to think about this. This is the first truly numbered Final Fantasy since 2015. 2016, I'm sorry. By the time, that's 7 years. That's the largest gap between numbered Final Fantasies. And I just feel like people aren't as excited as they should be. For years before they came out, God of War 2 and Horizon 2 and Elden Ring were constantly talked about by gaming media and gamers. Oh, I can't wait for this. It's going to be so good when it comes out. And I'm not hearing that for Final Fantasy 16 as I did years prior. The marketing has been somewhat thin. They only drop like a big trailer every couple of months, like say 6 months or so. But a numbered Final Fantasy back in the day was unbelievably hyped. Like I can personally remember like 10, 12, 13, 15, which extra long on that one. Regardless of what you think of those games, people were dreaming about playing them. They were brought up at all the time. What's it going to be? What's it going to be like? And I'm just not getting that from 16. Now, there could be a number of reasons for this, and I want input on this, and I'm not trying to offend fans of any certain games. But I think there's a couple of reasons for it. Number one, you have overlapping with the release of this game is Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. Now, I love Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1. I think it's one of the best games I played on the PS4. And I cannot wait for the Crisis Core remake coming out later this month because I love the original, and I cannot wait for next holiday when Remake Part 2 has come out. It's already been announced. And I feel like it saturates the market a little bit that we have a multiple huge number of Final Fantasy games out there. We have 14 coming out with expansion packs. We have Crisis Core, and we have the remake, the series of remakes and updates for it. So it makes a game with the Final Fantasy with a number attached to it feel less special. There's always been a ton of Final Fantasy games coming out, whether they be handheld spin-offs or what have you, Chocobo Racing. But like numbered Final Fantasies used to really stop and grab everyone's attention. That's just not the case right now because we have two almost conflicting sides of it. However, on a personal note, I am not a huge fan of the vibe of this game. So every Final Fantasy, there's no like, oh, what's the true Final Fantasy? Is it Knights and Swords and Kings like the first couple of titles? Is it more of a steampunk thing like Final Fantasy VI, which is very beloved? Or is it 7, 8, 9 and a little bit of 10, which is very anime influenced and cyberpunky? Like I said, very almost like an Akira Blade Runner type of vibe. Like what is it? An MMO? Or is it in Final Fantasy 12 taking influence from stories like Star Wars with like a Turkish flavor? It is you can't say what is a Final Fantasy. What is the definitive vibe of Final Fantasy other than Chocobos and Moogles and Bahamut? Like there's not a lot that you can say. Like I think part of the series' charm is that it is so experimental. Like, hey, we're going to try this, we're going to try this, we're going to try this. But I feel like 16 is treading on ground stylistically that isn't that interesting. It looks to be, and of course this can change to me, a very Swords and Kings, a very Western feeling visually RPG. It looks very Northern European, kings, knights, King Arthur, of course with the Final Fantasy flair. But characters just aren't jumping out at me. Like I can't immediately visually identify the main cast or the main character. His name is like Clive. And there's another character named like Joshua. And given not everyone needs to be an anime spiky boy, but there used to be like something gripping about the group of characters. Even in 15, they said it was a boy band, but there was a distinctive look of each of those characters. They all dressed in black, sure, but they had distinctive features and different names, like just the nomenclature, like Noctis, like that's a main character's name. And his hook was the teleporting weaponry, like Cloud, visually distinctive. Even characters like Squall and Titus, and Terra from Final Fantasy VI, and Cecil from Final Fantasy IV. These were distinctive characters. Final Fantasy IV being another Kings, Knights, and Swords type of affair. And of course it was sprite-based, but like these characters like Cecil and Kain and Rydia of the Red Wings, like these were very identifiable traits that hooked you and you can identify quickly. But like Clive with his brown hair and typical attire for like it almost looks like Dragon's Dogma, which is a great game, but it doesn't grab you as the king of JRPGs. And you may, like I said, I may be being harsh, but Final Fantasy is the king of JRPGs worldwide. It should grab you and not let go. Now, I do think there's some very cool things. Summons, Eidolons, Aeons, whatever you want to call them, are a huge part of Final Fantasy and always have been. And it looks like you actually get to play as one. As they say Ifrit, I've always said Ifrit, the fire Aeon. I've heard it said multiple times. And it looks like you're going to have big kaiju battles between like Odin, and the characters transform into Bahamut and Shiva and all these characters. And that looks very cool. That's very distinctive. But everything outside of that looks very visually bland. Like the characters, like I can't identify who's important and who's not. There's none of that characteristic flair. Maybe this is more of a Final Fantasy 14 thing where it's more kind of downplayed, like that anime aesthetic, which I think can be really well done when mixed with the Western European type of setting, could be better. But there's, and that's not to say the game isn't, the fidelity isn't there. The game looks graphically very impressive, but I just don't think they're putting that impressive horsepower behind something very distinctive. Put it this way, you know when you're looking at Final Fantasy X, it has a Thailand-esque design inspiration, water, huts, certain religious buildings. You know you're looking at that game. Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, 10 in particular being 3D games. Like you can identify each one of it, like those games from, if the no characters were on screen, you were just to see the background, the artwork. You're like, that's a 7 location, that's an 8 location, that's a 9 location. Even in some of the sprite-based games, you would definitely be able to do that. 4 and 6 in particular. Just from 6 having a steampunk look, like that's 6. I don't really know. I think, and I've rambled on about this long enough, I'll just say the art direction to me isn't hooking me yet. But on to gameplay. This is very controversial. This can be very good or bad. From what I'm to understand, your party members will be totally AI driven, and it's mostly a third-person action game. In fact, the combat director of Devil May Cry 5, one of the best games released in the last couple of years, is the head of the combat for Final Fantasy 16. And it looks fast and flashy and awesome in many ways. I wish it was in a cooler looking game, but one thing I must say is the combat itself looks phenomenal. Now this is going to turn a lot of people off because Final Fantasy has jumped around in combat systems, getting more and more real time as time has gone on. However, this I would say that's true if I didn't know that that was the combat director, because the combat in Devil May Cry 5 was so smooth. I'm excited for it, but I see where people are getting upset with it. But however, this is Final Fantasy. Like I said, this is just probably going to be, like, they're going to change it in the next one. So if you don't like this one, they'll probably change it in the next one. And most combat systems do grow on me after, like, turn-based is always preferred. I love turn-based, but you know what? Like ATB was really cool when they sped up turn-based, and Final Fantasy 13 was pseudo turn-based. I'd say it's more turn-based than real-time, and I ended up really liking the combat in 13. Say what you will about that game, the combat ends up being really good later in the game. And 15 was definitely more real-time than it was turn-based. It was almost entirely real-time with, like, cooldown. And I feel like 16 is an evolution of that, where it looks like it's just going to be fully third-person action game. So I don't think that takes away from it being a Final Fantasy game. It's just, I feel like with the controversy of the combat and the visual, and I've seen this online, like just boredom of the art style of the game and its competition from Final Fantasy 7, I feel like it's getting drowned out, and that makes me sad. Maybe I'll be wrong. I want to be wrong. Maybe when I get this game, because I am going to get this game and it's in my hands, I'll end up loving it. And I'm going to get that game on release date, which was announced June 22nd, 2023. 7 months away, and I'm very excited for that. Just to see what it is. Regardless of my thought, it's still a Final Fantasy, right? It's still going to be a baseline, pretty damn good game when it comes out, right? Like, they're not going to let this happen. But I'm wondering if all these combining factors, all these combative features of the game are going to hinder it, because it's definitely hindering the hype. Because I'll tell you right now, like, there are some people frothing at the bit for it, but I feel like the focus is just too spread. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe like this westernized Final Fantasy is counterbalancing the very anime-inspired Final Fantasy VII remake, and that's why they're doing it. But I don't know. I knew who Noctis was years before I played 15. I knew who Lightning was years before 13 came out. Titus, even Vaughn, not one of my favorites, but from 12, I knew who the main character was, but 16 just isn't doing it for me, guys. I want to know, what do you think? Are you excited for this? Are you a 14 player who's excited that Yoshi P is at the head of this whole thing? Are you a single player fan who's just into it because it's a Final Fantasy game. What are your thoughts, hopes, and concerns? I am just going to be trepidatious with it. I'm going to criticize it a bit, but I'm going to put my money on it, buy it, and hope for a good game. And if I'm wrong, I'll be the first one to say it. But yeah, that was it. We got a cool trailer for Final Fantasy 16, and it is coming out June 22nd, 2023. And, throughout the rest of the night of the Game Awards, there were tons of announcements that I can't all cover here. There's a stage crasher at the very end. Let's go, Bill Clinton. Let me know. At the end of all of this, was it a good show for you? It was a pretty good show for me. Of course, I tuned in and out. I was playing my Switch halfway through it. I was, not fully focused during a lot of it, for the ads or, anything to do with esports. But I walked away pretty happy between Elden Ring and God of War doing really good and Bayonetta winning Best Action Game. Still odd that they're even distinguishing God of War's action adventure winner and Bayonetta's action, just showing like that's what that action winner, like that's what that's for. I was happy with the Street Fighter 6 and Tekken showings, with Death Stranding 2 being announced along with Armored Core 6, Final Fantasy 16 getting announcement, this really weird Bayonetta 3 game, Star Wars, Crash, some of the minor announcements I had my eye on. And that's it, guys. That was the Game Awards 2023 highlight reel from me, Mike, like what I cared about. And yeah, let me know, like, what's something I should probably keep my eye on that you saw that you're like, what, Mike, give this a second look, because I glanced over some of those indie trailers. Nothing really rose to the top for me. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Like I said, my opinions on the upcoming games could change. Were you upset by any of the winners or losers of the awards? And yeah, thank you for watching this whole thing, if you have. This was unscripted. I just wrote down some of the highlights, the bullet points of things I cared about as I watched the show. And I just wanted to share it with you because I love talking about games. And, I know that this may come off as haphazard, but I really appreciate if you guys have watched all the way to the end, have listened to me ramble. I really do just talk this quickly normally. I don't take 5-hour energies before a video. Like most people have commented before, like I actually try to avoid caffeine. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should take, a Monster, a 5-hour, and a Rockstar right before a video and see how fast I talk then. I could probably shorten the whole thing down to 3 minutes. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for watching my content. Please check out my other videos. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, please take care of yourself. My name is Mike, and this has been Chip Damage. Have a great night.